Welcome to the All Hoops podcast. I'm your host, Steve Inman, and I'm joined by co-host Chris Brito. We are down to our final four NBA teams left in the playoffs, and unfortunately for Chris and I, the Knicks are not one of them. Chris, it's been a tough 24 hours, but we're still here. We have to do a pod. How are you?
Hey, Steve. Of course, I'm in all black mourning the Knicks. And, it was a great season. We did the best we could. I thought we did the best we could with all the injuries, no Randall. And quite simply, this team just showed so much effort. It's hard to not be proud of them, hard to not be like hopeful for the future, which I think is a sentiment that we don't typically feel at the end of the season. You know, there will definitely be a lot of what ifs. But the biggest thing that I know about this team is that it'll give you everything that they have, even at the cost of their own bodies. Now, whether they can bring them all back together is a different question, which is what we'll discuss in the pod. But first, let me hear your thoughts about how the season went, what impressed you the most, and then what's the one thing you're looking forward to the next season.
Yeah, I mean, the impressiveness was just how many hits they took, and they just kept getting back up. I mean, Josh Hart had some incredible rebounding games. He had a couple of go-ahead shots late in games in these series, right? And then for him to get hurt, that kind of seemed to be the final nail in the coffin for this Knicks team when he gets hurt in game six. OG Anunoby got hurt. Bojan Bogdanovic got hurt. Mitchell Robinson, who had basically season-ending surgery, came back and was contributing in the playoffs, and then he got hurt again. And then obviously you mentioned Randall. And then Brunson breaks his hand in midway through game seven, and it looks like the Knicks were making a run, and then he leaves the game. Rick Brunson, his dad, follows him into the tunnel, so you kind of knew something was up. And that's a whole team, Chris. That's literally an entire team. And so getting all those guys back, I think they could have fought with Boston for the Eastern Conference title. And that's a statement I never was able to say about a Knick team before this team. So they were a really special group. Dante DiVincenzo even had a 39-point game. In this one, he had a 35-point game in game three. So like he showed some flashes. He could have been a most improved candidate. And Chris, I just think the way they fought, the way their chemistry was incredible. This is probably the most well liked group, like in terms of like from fan perception and from their own perception, probably we've ever seen. Now, how do they take that next step? I think obviously getting healthy will help, but they got some work to do. They got to bring OG Anunoby back. You can't let him walk after trading quickly Barrett and the 31st overall pick in the draft to go get him. My concern with getting him was the price tag. This is a guy who's always hurt. He's not a go-to option. He's probably a third option on a good team, which is fine for where the Knicks are, but that's going to be 35 to 40 million a year. That's going to be a monster contract that all of a sudden Julius Randle's going to look at that and go, wait, he's making more than me. And you're going to have Jalen Brunson going, wait, he's making more than me. And so is that going to cause problems? We'll see. And then you have Isaiah Hartenstein, who really, other than Josh Hart, was kind of the heart and soul of this team in the playoffs. He was having all these offensive rebounds. He really kept them in a couple of these games himself. He, because he's only been on Nick for 2 years, they don't have his full bird rights. They only have partial bird rights, which in nerd terms basically means they can only give him 175% raise on the 8+ million he made this year. And so the most the Knicks can offer him is 16.2 million a year starting next year. Is that enough to bring him in? Maybe. Should they bring him in on that number? You're going to be paying Mitchell Robinson and Hartenstein 31+ million a year, which I think right now you would probably say yes to that, but it still is not a perfect situation. So does paying OG and Hartenstein 50+ million total to run this thing back? You're way over the cap at this point. Is that enough to be a championship team?
I think one of the numbers that we just couldn't ignore were the numbers um, that earlier this January when we had the full squad together, I think we had the best rebounding numbers, the best offensive efficiency rate, the best. Um, we were the best in like multiple categories. And I think what really stood out was, you know, you had Randall who was opening things up for Jalen, who could hit like catch and shoot threes. He was shooting them at a higher percentage. And I think that's in part because, you have this threat of OG on the corners. Um, and it was just something that was like blossoming. And as you said, you know, it's hard to see what this team could have looked like without all the injuries. And it'll be even harder to see what it'll look like if we don't get everyone, the whole band back together. Like part of me thinks that we should at least explore the idea of like running it back. In part because it was so successful. Like we destroyed, the Nuggets by 40. Like it was a regular season win. I know what you're gonna say, but I think those are like little things that you just can't ignore. Um, and Randall could have definitely helped in these playoffs. He could have like carried us in one of the games or a few of the games. Um, but it just so happens that him and Bogdan end up being the best um, trading chips that we have. So, and listen, the discussion has already started. A lot of teams are monitoring the situation with the Knicks and him. Um, that to me is code word for someone. There's an inkling that maybe the Knicks could be looking to upgrade in some way.
Yeah, I mean the Knicks are
And
always looking to upgrade.
for sure. And my final point is I have the full trust of this front office, and I think there might be a knee-jerk reaction to maybe um, do something hasty, but they've earned my confidence. So like whatever they do is probably for the best, even whether that means not signing OG, which I think they will, or that means moving on from Hardenstein, which I think is could happen.
Yeah, I definitely think OG is a lot more likely to come back than Hartenstein. We'll see with those two guys. Another guy who is going to be watched this summer is going to be James Dolan because James Dolan, has always said, "I'm willing to put in the money for this team," but the team is stunk. There's been no reason to go way over the cap for bad Knicks teams. Like there's no reason to do it.
Yeah.
And so now you have this team that won 7 playoff games, which is more than they had won in any season since 2000. Since that was when he started with the Knicks.
Yeah.
And so now you have a situation where they're going to be way over the cap next year. Is he going to be willing to pay a luxury tax? Is he going to be willing to do all these things that they're going to need him to do? And he's always tired of getting booed at games. That's going to be a quick way to get booed at games if we get a whiff of them being cheap this summer. And again, you can go over the cap for Hartenstein. If you can get him at that 16 million number, you can go bring OG back. You can run this thing back and then see where you are. I think that's probably the right way to go. That's the way I would do it. I think they're going to look at stars because they're the New York Knicks. They always look at stars. I don't know if there's the right fit this year. I don't know if Donovan Mitchell becomes available. I think they would explore that. We talked about that before the show. I don't think it's the best fit with him and Brunson. I think they're going to take away a little bit from each other. Where does that put Hart? Where does that put Dante DiVincenzo? But at the same time, I don't think they're going to be the highest bidders on a Mitchell deal. I think the Knicks would say, we like him. We don't know if he's the best fit. We're not going to give you everything for him, where some other team might. Oklahoma City has 30 million draft picks. New Orleans has 30 million draft picks. One of those teams probably could use Mitchell more than the Knicks can. So we'll see how this all plays out. There might be a superstar we're not thinking of who's 27. He's a wing or a power forward that would be a much better fit than what the Knicks have now. That could happen. But I think right now they're probably going to run it back.
Who is the perfect fit? Without like thinking about like who we have on the roster and let's say remove the financial considerations and had a desire to play with us.
I probably would have said Embiid was the perfect fit before these playoffs, and just seeing how hurt he was Like you don't need Tom Thibodeau ending his career. You don't need it from his perspective. You don't need it from the Knicks' perspective. Maybe a center, maybe a power forward, maybe some kind of bigger wing. I thought the guy going into the year was Jaylen Brown. He signed the mega extension, so I don't think he's going anywhere, let alone Boston trading with the Knicks. I don't see that either. Um, so we'll see. It's going to have to be a guy who could fit with Brunson. That's the number one key, and a guy who could play some defense because you've seen guys who could score get here and they just don't get minutes because they don't play defense. And so we'll see how that plays out. But my guess is that guy does not emerge here. Booker could be one of those guys because he could play a little point. He could play some two. He could even play a little three. I think Tom Thibodeau could get something out of him defensively, or Tom Thibodeau would get fired. And so I think Booker could make a lot of sense. I don't think the Suns are blowing it up, but if they do, that would be the guy I would look at.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And I think Booker would be my preference out of all those guys. I know Paul George was another one, another former Leon. I think he was another late.
That to me seems more realistic because they're not going to need to go trade a haul to go get him.
Yeah.
You just have to pay him, and it doesn't
He-
for whatever reason the
And
Clippers have
then
not picked him up yet.
and then the other aspect that makes all of it interesting is the Knicks are close, closer than we thought, and closer than we have ever been in a very long time. So, James Dolan, when you listen to this podcast, I want you to give the Knicks a chance. That's all I have to say.
That's all we got to say. And again, they also have three, draft picks in this draft. They, 24, 25, and I think 38 is the second round pick they have. Um, I would just go swing for the fences, try to go get a couple of high upside guys. Kevin McCullough out of Kansas is a guy who can kind of do everything. So maybe you take him as that steady guy. He kind of reminds me a little bit of like a bigger Grimes. He can just do a little bit of everything. He's not like, he's not going to be a great shooter, a great scorer, great passer, but he's a good scorer. He's a good shooter. He's a good passer. He can defend. He's a senior. So I think he's an older guy who, if Tom Thibodeau was ever going to play a rookie, this could be the guy. So I like him out of Kansas. I think that one makes sense. And then maybe you just go upside with that other pick. Or they probably most likely just kick the can down the road. They trade those picks for future picks and then hold those assets for whatever star is coming in 2029. So
Well, I think the part that intrigues me the most about this draft is that I believe Jericho Sims is a free agent, and I'm not saying we have to plan around him, but we'll definitely lose some front court depth. So I think we'll likely go big at some point. Um, and
also a free agent. Would not surprise me. He's a
yeah,
restricted free agent, meaning the Knicks can match any deal, but it would not surprise me if they just let him go off and do something else.
he can go to the Oklahoma City Thunder if he wants.
There you go. All right, Chris, before we move on from the Knicks, I just want to give a little credit for the Pacers. Obviously, you and I both picked the Knicks. They got a lot more injuries since then. So, yes, we are blaming the injuries for the reason why they did not move on. But at the same time, the Pacers had the greatest shooting performance in the history of the playoffs in
Yeah.
Game 7. They came into the bright lights of MSG. It was loud, and they hit every shot, 67% from the floor, the greatest shooting game in playoff history. Siakam was incredible. Miles Turner was great. Halliburton had some big moments. Their role players all did great. I don't think TJ McConnell missed a 10-footer the entire time. I think you could make the case the Pacers would have won in less than 7 games if Rick Carlisle actually played McConnell 30 minutes a game. Not the 45, 30. And so you got to give them a ton of credit. And they earned this one. They really did. I understand there were a lot of injuries. Yes, there were also injuries in the first round when they got away with not playing against Giannis and some Dame Lillard in a couple of those games. But Chris, whether you're wide open or not, they shot the lights out of the ball.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, and I think I don't want this to get lost in the discourse of the Pacers, but frankly, it doesn't matter if the team you're facing is injured or not. Like, we can say that as Knicks fans that we're proud of this team because of how they played with, with all the limitations that they had. But the Pacers were just better. I mean, that's why they won. And I think, the Pacers blew them out in the last 2 games that they played against the Knicks and blew them out in game 4. So it wasn't close as much as we want to think about it. It wasn't exactly close. Um, and then the Pacers, I think Siakam was the key to this series. As much as Halliburton was sort of painted as the villain or whoever, I don't know who considers him the villain per se, but the
He was the villain.
like
He
Siakam was
he taunted
Siakam
everybody.
to
No,
me,
Stockholm just went about his business. Halliburton's the one,
to
drawing back
me,
at the Knicks. He's drawing
to
back at
me,
Spike. He's doing the choke. He's got the choke,
yeah,
Reggie Miller
screw that guy.
sweatshirt.
Yeah.
No, that was the villain
Whatever.
from the Knicks'
My
perspective.
my point is like he wasn't this wasn't like Trey Young from a few years ago. Like this was like Halliburton had like three good games, disappeared for three of the games. And my point is Siakam was really the key to that series. That's all.
No, I think that's a great point. And you know what? Like what Siakam did, especially in the last couple games where he just said, I have a smaller guy on me, like Josh Hart, give me the ball and I'm going to go to work. That's exactly what they kind of needed the last couple years at a Randall in the playoffs, where he's aggressive, but he's under control. He kind of has the same two or three moves, but you know where they're going to go. And if you get him in the right spots, he's going to hit jumpers, he's going to hit layups, he's going to hit dunks. That's where the Knicks need Randall to be going into next year's playoffs. And if they can do that, I think they're going to be, they can learn a lot from this series.
I agree. And I think now looking toward the next round, I think the Pacers stand no chance against the Celtics. But the Pacers are sort of used to it too, so I don't put it behind them. They can steal a game or two.
So, what's your prediction?
Oh, Boston in five.
Okay, I'm gonna take Boston in six. I think I learned my lesson a little bit about this Pacer team. We picked the Knicks in five in the last series, right? Um, I I think it's gonna be hard for Boston to flip the switch and say, we're gonna play with pace, we're gonna play with energy for not a game, but the entire series. Like it's going to be really hard for them to kind of just match them shot for shot. Like the Pacers could easily just have another 60% shooting day, and then you have no chance. And so I think they're going to, I think they're going to take a game or two from Boston. And I think they're going to be the biggest challenge Boston has faced so far, which isn't saying much. But
I was just gonna say, like, who do they face that was tough, but that's the way it goes, right? Like, I mean, we had in some ways, like if we would have been in the Pacers, people would have said, "Oh, we had an easy path also."
no way. We played the
Well,
Pacers.
because we didn't play the Bucks full strength.
Yeah, but nobody did. Like that Philly team, they gave us everything. The Knicks, they gave the Knicks everything they had. And Embiid had a 50-point game. Maxey had one of the greatest come from behind games ever. Like, and the Knicks survived all that. So, like, no, I don't think anybody's going to say that. I think they can say that about the Celtics. The Celtics have played a Cleveland team that just looked like they had no business in the second round. And then they didn't have Jared Allen for the whole series. They didn't have Donovan Mitchell for the last couple games. And Cleveland kind of just hung around. And so I don't see why the Pacers can't do that and then hit a couple shots down the stretch that Cleveland couldn't. And so that's why I'm going to take the Celtics in six, but I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk for them.
Yeah, and I guess looking toward the Western Conference, where we had one of the a very exciting game seven with the Timberwolves versus the Nuggets. I really thought the Nuggets were going to win. I thought they were going to find a way to win, but they did not win. The Wolves were just incredible. They came roaring back in that second half, and you know, hats off to the game MVP Rudy Gobert.
Oh, don't do
Um,
this. Don't do this. Come on, man. Rudy almost got benched yesterday. And he had
but
13
but
9.
he
Joker
did.
went right after him. And Joker and Murray were fantastic. And no one else could hit a shot for Denver. They blew a 20-point lead. And to me, that had nothing to do with Gobert. It's because
I
the
mean,
Timberwolves
you
played
can
great defense.
listen. You can phrase it as much as you want that he had nothing to do with it. He had no.
Nothing to do with it is the wrong way to say it. But at the same time, he's at best the fourth most important guy on that team.
I would argue he's
Not
the
at best.
second.
He's
I'd,
the
I'd
fourth best
argue
player on the
he's the second or third, but
team.
not the fourth.
Edwards and Towns. Those guys were fantastic in the last couple games.
I mean, you could replace Towns' production with Nas Reed.
Nas Reed was also fantastic. If you told me Nas Gobert's hurt and Nas Reed and Towns are going to start, I'm still picking the Timberwolves in the next round. Which
Mm,
is funny
I
because
I
I've had no read
honestly
on the
I think
Timberwolves the whole time, to be
honestly
fair.
I think now
We have
to
picked
me
against the Timberwolves in both series so far, just to be fair. So I don't know if
I'm
we're the
gonna
best people to
I'm gonna
ask.
go I'm gonna go with the Wolves to win it all.
Wow.
I'm saying it right now. They're gonna beat the Mavericks in 7 games,
Right.
and I just think they're not scared of anyone. And I think they're gonna beat the Celtics in the finals.
Wow.
I think
Wow.
I
Calling
think
it out.
this to me beating the championship um the winners from last year, the Nuggets, like I think that to me just like speaks volumes to like how mentally tough they are.
On the
Like
road, too.
on the road, they beat the Nuggets 3 times at home
It's
in
pretty crazy
Denver.
thinking that. And
That's
again, it's not
that's
like somebody
unheard
was
of.
hurt. Murray and Joker gave their best effort. Like they had huge games. And
Right.
they just said, okay, those guys are going to put up their points, stop everybody else.
Like
And they did. Like Aaron
it,
Gordon had like 4 points, 4 rebounds in game 7.
it's graceful. And to me, if you look at the Mavericks, like they have multiple bodies that can go like at both of those guys. Their best 2 players.
Yeah.
Like it's like okay, fine. Luca and Kyrie will score 60 points. Who's gonna score the other 50 points?
It's going to have to be PJ Washington, who had a big series in the second round. He did nothing
He's
in the first round. So
no,
it's
no,
which
right.
PJ Washington is it?
Is he gonna score against, you know,
I don't think so.
you know?
I don't think so. I think the Timberwolves are going to take this one in 5 games. I've been off on them the whole time. I'm ready to give them their respect. Edwards is fantastic.
We're in part I'm also rooting for them because of our buddy Mitch, who is
I'm not ready to commit to that for Mitch. Mitch told us he's barely even watching the games. Like,
it's
are we
still
really going to decide a champion on Mitch who barely even watching? Like,
I just want to have you on
not that
record.
there's another team
Would
that
you be
jumps out
rooting
to
for the
me.
Wolves if it wasn't for Gobert?
Yes.
Okay.
I just hate the idea that I said this is one of the 2 or 3 worst trades of the decade. He doesn't really perform well last year. This year,
Okay.
last year,
Yeah, you did.
Anthony Edwards really literally telling people, I have 2 bigs in my way. I can't get to the paint. And then they change nothing and now they're good. And Anthony Edwards is, to me, the #1 reason for that.
I think I think
Something
I
a
think
secondary
well, I
role
think
is a big part. And
well,
McDaniels
well we
not
did say this.
not getting hurt.
So we did
And,
say one thing though.
but
I think that is important to contextualize all these things. Okay, Rudy's not going to blow you away with his numbers. We know this. But him coming onto the Wolves allowed for Cat to not worry about defense in the way that he used to and not be a starting center. And I think all of that has helped the progression of Cat, which, in my opinion, was unlocked by this trade. It took a year to unfold. And I think Chris Finch is probably a top 4, top 5 coach in the game right now for figuring this out because the one part I will admit is that I didn't see how they were going to be able to do this as well as they are right now. But there's something to be said about it being the best defensive group all year long.
yeah.
And now in their final remaining 4 in the NBA playoffs.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And obviously, and I think Gobert deserves some credit for that defense. I think McDaniels deserves a ton of credit for that defense.
Oh,
I just don't really get the idea that you have 4 first-round picks, a good young center in Walker Kessler, and you're giving Gobert 41 million a year. Oh, and he's also a free agent at the end of next year, so you got to figure out that deal too. But if you win a championship, none of that matters. None of that matters. It doesn't matter how much you gave up. It doesn't matter how much the Lakers gave up for Anthony Davis, right? Like we always say, who cares? They won a championship. That would be the same situation here. So
all right.
you and I are both in agreement, a Celtics Timberwolves NBA Finals, and I think that'll be a lot of fun. So I think
Yeah, I think that'll be good.
looking
That'll
forward
be
to
good for
that.
the NBA too. So Yeah.
Yeah, two teams that have not won in a while. Timberwolves, obviously haven't been to a conference final since '04, right? And the Celtics haven't done this since their battles with Kobe in a long time ago. So, Chris, let's get to our final thoughts. Here's another topic you're not going to like. I believe one of the biggest reasons these four teams are in the conference finals is because they bottomed out. The Celtics traded an old Garnett and Pierce to the Nets. They got two draft picks. They got a bunch of draft picks. Two of those became Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. The Timberwolves had two number one picks. Anthony Edwards, their best player, Karl Anthony Towns, their second best player, right? You have the Dallas Mavericks, who literally got in trouble for using the word "we're tanking," right? They get the fifth overall pick. They trade up two spots to get Luka Doncic. And then the Indiana Pacers, they're kind of a middling team with Paul George. He goes, "Get me out of here. I'm not re-signing." They trade him for Sabonis, and then they trade Sabonis for Halliburton. So all four of these teams, they started from the bottom, and now they're here.
See, I kind of interpreted it as all this was sort of like a different sort of trade construction, though, not necessarily bottoming out in the way OKC has.
I mean, they all were ready to blow it up. They all blew it up, and they had a situation that was pretty good, and they tore it down. And
Like for example, the Celtics, right? You you had IT right before you had Jason Tatum and you had Jaylen Brown.
no, they were the same time. They got to the conference finals that first year
Right,
together.
right. No, no, I'm saying like I'm saying like they were sort of doing two things at once, is what I'm getting at. Because they also had Kyrie the year before that, you know, with all the with those same young guys that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, with the Wolves, you know, were the I mean, maybe I just don't know if it that's the way every team should build their roster. Like we saw the Knicks build it differently. You know, the Pacers made some shrewd trades. I think what how they're building the roster now is really smart. They have two players on big contracts, and the rest of their guys are on like much smaller contracts. It's like a brilliant way of like building the new rosters under the new CBA.
I don't know. Like that Celtic
And
team, right? They trade Pierce, they trade Garnett, right?
but like
Doc
what? That
Rivers
was
goes, I don't want
10
to,
years
I don't want
ago,
to.
8
This
years.
was 2013-14, right? So that was their first season.
So it took that long.
That was 10 years ago. Brad Stevens gets his first year coaching. Doc Rivers, I don't want to coach a rebuilding team. Brandon Bass was their top win share player that year. They won 25 games. And they used all those draft picks to rebuild this thing into a team that's in the Eastern Conference Finals every year and is looking like one of the favorites to win it all.
I think, but we can also look at an example like Philadelphia also, and then it not working. Like, I think it's, I think to me, it's a testament of how different rosters are being, like, different types of rosters are built. And I think, like, you can't get in the habit of like hoping for a superstar in the draft. Like, imagine like OKC,
But at the same time,
yeah.
you can't expect that superstar. You got to hope for it because you look, the superstars left in the playoffs, they were all homegrown guys except for Halliburton.
And then I also think like it's a little bit about like the parity in the NBA too. And like just, the old guard is just not there anymore.
Right.
Like we had the Suns were one of the favorites to make it to the finals. We had other teams that like the Nuggets. Did they bottom out? No, you know.
They also had a top seven lottery pick and hit with Jamal Murray. They also had another lottery pick with Michael Porter Jr.
Who's that?
on that one.
Wait, wasn't the Murray pick the Nets before?
No, you're thinking of Lillard. That was Lillard.
That was low, you're right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Which nice job, Nets. Their draft picks have been used for Damian Lillard, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and I'm sure a bunch of other guys.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, I don't know if that's exactly what you want to do, but it's worked for these four teams in some way. But I mean, I guess with the Celtics, like 10 years when you put it
Yeah,
that
but
way.
they were in a finals 2 years ago. It didn't take 10 years to figure this out. They were
But like at what point, like, do you say, I guess you could even look at the Knicks the same way too, right? Like they bottomed out for RJ Barrett. RJ Barrett ended up
yeah,
being a piece for
OG.
OG.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's something there. There's something
I,
there.
I don't like, but how else do you build? I mean, I don't think they were intentionally losing. It was just really bad.
They did try to bottom this thing out on purpose in the Zion draft. They said this
Sure.
is the year we're getting Zion. They had the worst record in basketball. They did not get the number one pick. They got RJ Barrett. They fired everyone and said, this is a terrible idea. You told me we were getting Zion. And instead, they get RJ Barrett, who became a very nice player, a good player, a not great player. And when they finally moved on from him, it meant the rebuild was over. It's time to go compete for a championship, and that's where they're going forward now. So Chris, anything else before we wrap up the show?
Um, no, but I'm just really happy with how the Knicks season turned out. It was really sad that the season was over. Yes, I fully expected to like keep the party going, but it was a fun party while it lasted.
Absolutely. So that's going to do it for us here on the All Hoops podcast. Stick around the next couple of weeks. We're going to recap the Eastern and Western Conference Finals, and then eventually the NBA Finals. Then we have a draft. Then we have free agency. The best still yet to come. So thank you for watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify and Apple. We'll be back next week to talk more NBA action.